Graça, where does this podcast find you?
Hello. So it finds me in Lisbon, Portugal. I'm actually near in center of the city. Fortunately, where I am is peaceful. I can hear the birds singing, which is not what now is the buzz of the city, but I'm in a more peaceful area, so you find me in a good place.
Wonderful. And for those of our listeners who don't know you or of you, why don't we start off and you can give us a little bit of an idea of who you are and what drives you, the work you do?
So my name is Graça. I was born in Lisbon. Basically, all my life I lived here, although during my PhD and my master thesis, I studied abroad, I researched abroad, but basically, this is my city, my place of being. That's where I really like to be. So my degree is on law, so I'm a lawyer, France, and then I just decided that I wanted to know more about social dynamics. So my PhD is in sociology. That's where for some years I was a researcher at university in Portugal. So I researched on the area of social sciences, justice, racial discrimination, all those areas. And then I started what I usually call my first season of life, which was almost 25 years of public service. So I was in different roles. We'll get there. My last role was Minister of Culture during till 2022, during COVID time. And my background is basically all on social sciences, public policies, everything crossing from arts, culture, entrepreneurship, innovation. So that has been my path over the years.
And as we discussed before we hopped on, you really are a dream guest for this podcast. So I'm really glad we get to have this conversation ever since I came across you and your work. And we have a lot to discuss. So I want to really jump in. Maybe to kick us off, as you already mentioned, your work really sits at the intersection of culture, art, and democratic policy making.
Mhm.
And obviously, with the title of this podcast, I have a suspicion why these fields. But let me ask you, why these fields, why this intersection, and why do you think that that is even more so important, maybe today than it ever was?
See, so all my life, what drives me is people, is the collective interest, if you want. That's what drives me. I'm a philanthropic public service person. I'm not so much a corporate mindset person. I found out that about me recently, basically. But all my life, what drove me always was about people and how to engage people to build a better society, basically. So in Lisbon, for instance, we'll get there, but the participatory budgets and all the participatory tools that I've led along, not only Lisbon, but then after in government with the national participatory budget, it's always about how to bring people to be agents of change. And that is not easy. It could be a simple thing, but it's not because we are so, we are so into our lives. So nowadays, societies are so complex. We are surrounded by information, by so much entertainment, so much things that we want to do. That about the collective is not always on our mind. And I'm a strong believer that really do people have the power, like Patti Smith sings. So the thing is how to bring people. And I across different projects, what I discover is if you use art, if you use something that is cool, something that is funny, something that drives people attention, something that it's not about, that formal bureaucratic process.
Right.
It's not about, it's not about something that people tend to react at, okay, I don't have time for that. If you find that, it's easier to engage people. Just to give you an example, when I was in city council, so for 6 years, I led the participatory budget. And each year I felt that it was like starting over. It was like, okay, let's again go to people and say that they can present ideas for the city and they can vote for the ideas and that they can transform the city by their own choices. But each year we had to invent something new. And one of the years, for instance, it was a really iconic image of the city. One invented the post-it wall on the Design Museum in Lisbon, which is in basically the main artery of downtown, which is Rua Augusta. So we basically started inviting people that were passing through. Hey, don't you want to leave your idea for the city, put your post-it, and then just put it on the wall? So we design this amazing image with post-its from different colors with ideas from the people for the city. So it's about that. So my experience is you have to always find a cool, innovative, creative way to get people attention. And if you think about that in your day-to-day life, you'll understand that it is like that, right? So if it's not attracting you in some way, probably you will not even notice, basically.
Yeah, I love to hear the very concrete examples, because one of the things that I wrote down in my research prepping for the conversation was that you are really one of the pioneers of this participatory way of governing. And I was wondering, and I wrote this down as a question, is how do you get people to continuously participate in today's world, especially, and especially also because government, just like most other types of leadership, let's say, are so the opposite of that, right? This kind of command and control approach to everything
Mm.
from policy making to business leadership is very opposing on the spectrum to this participatory approach. So what have you found in terms of how people respond to that? Because it
Mm.
also puts a certain level of accountability and responsibility back on people participating.
So my answer to that is I think you have to build trust. That's for me the most important thing. So it has to be about you have to really build the conviction in people that you are for real and you are not
Yeah.
just making show off, which is sometimes the problem is that you are
Yeah.
just doing show off because it really gives a lot of work doing this. It really does because you have to get there. You have to go to public assemblies. You have to have the time to listen to what people want to say to you. Do you have to
Yeah.
explain to them what's the process, what's the use of the process, how to make it more transparent so that people trust the process, how to make people understand that it's up to them to change the way that their community lives or the neighborhood looks like.
Yeah.
I always used concrete examples in Lisbon and then in Portugal. So the national, of course, was much more challenging because I mean,
I assume
in
so.
Portugal, we were the first national participatory budget. I think till today, still the only one that's really was designed and implemented basically was here because it really gives you when you are in government basically it gives you it's tough in a way
Hmm.
because you feel like you are doing this and you are doing that in my case I was doing for a strong and deep belief that if people are more part of the process maybe democracy will not be so much like in danger like I think it
Yes.
is in some areas of the world but basically it is about giving examples and for instance in Lisbon I use this example was like okay you have a grandson and you want to go with your grandson to play in the park but you don't have a park in the place where you live okay so that's your chance go to participatory budgets and present the idea that you want a playground here and you want it to be in that place because you want to be there and if you convince more people in your between your neighbors and your community maybe they will vote for that and if they vote for that maybe the project will win and when it happens, like in 1 year, you can go there with your grandson and play with him.
Yeah.
So that's the way that you change your neighborhood. And actually, these kind of examples, like you were saying, usually it work because it's something that is, that you can touch, that you can feel, and that you can basically imagine. So you need to give people the possibility of imagining something that is feasible and not something that is abstract or just a possible commitment, but it's something that it will happen. And when it happens, you go there and you bring that person and say, "See, there's the playground for you to be with your grandson." And then you start, engaging people. In Lisbon, we felt that. So along the
Yeah.
way, people, each year you had more people participating, presenting ideas, going to assemblies, discussing with neighbors, then presenting, then do amazing campaigns to make people vote for their projects. So in Lisbon, you really felt that it was growing, and you have good examples across the world. Just
Yeah.
to give you an example, and I'll stop here. Last year, I was in a project of the European Commission. European Commission basically organizes citizens plenaries, citizens assemblies for some, let's say, strategic policies at European level. And basically, the process is they select randomly 150 citizens from across Europe to go to Brussels for a period of 3 long weekends, basically, to discuss and present recommendations on a specific policy. In that case, was the policy for intergenerational fairness, and I was in the knowledge committee. So I was the knowledge committee, and I was there as an expert, and it was amazing to be in that process, because those 150 citizens from across Europe, they really did engage with the idea, with the process, the expectation to be listened to and to be a part of the future of Europe in terms of policy. So I think it's always about how do you get people to engage and to trust in what you are saying, that it will be the results of this. And my experience is that if you can build that, people will respond really positively to that.
What stands out to me in all of this is really there's a few things, but one is you really do need to, as a leader, have a deep level of care, true level of care and sincerity about the people that you get to lead. And the other thing that actually, I forgot where I heard this just recently, as the neighborhood being the unit for change. And I think that is another thing that sticks out with me, and also something that I can say from my experience leading change in big organizations, it typically doesn't happen at the abstract level, right? And I think that's where typically change falls flat. It needs to happen in a small neighborhood, and where you can point to, and I love the very concrete examples, pragmatic betterment. And that builds the trust. And then eventually you can step by step attempt bigger projects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
you have to start a small scale.
Yeah. And it requires, which I think is probably hard both in the business world and in the world of policy making. It takes a long time arc, right? That's something that, especially I guess on the societal level, is a much bigger challenge, where you have rotating, in democracies, typically rotating government. So that's interesting. I want to ask specifically about one other thing from your past work as a public servant and policymaker, and that is, you already touched on this briefly. You were in the early 20s the driving force behind positioning Lisbon as an international innovation hub. I remember this to the extent that at that time I was in Berlin in a tech startup when Berlin didn't really have a tech ecosystem. And I do remember specifically when Lisbon came on the map, and we actually took some trips there, and you could feel something changing there the same way it felt in Berlin, the creativity, the innovation. I'm currently working on a book about ingenuity, and I'd love to ask you about the conditions you think are necessary to create a place or space where vibrant innovation and invention of the future can actually happen. What are those factors? Because you actually did it. I mean, when you hear people talk about Lisbon today, not only do they say these things, but they feel it. It's become a reality.
Yeah. Well, so I was in Lisbon as a council or deputy mayor, I don't know what's the right, but basically I was responsible for between 2009 and 15. So it was during the financial crisis, basically. I had the area of economy and innovation, which was actually created at that time within local government. So it did not exist before. And I also had, like I mentioned, participatory, so the citizenship area. And I had several areas also. I had education, but basically let's focus on this. And we were at a time where the financial crisis really was really hitting hard on Lisbon. So Lisbon, when I was elected in 2009, it really was not a good economic.
Yeah, I remember that
time. So nowadays people I don't think they remember the way that the city was, and the change was so fast. But basically, downtown was closed in terms of buildings and activities, and there was a lot of distress in companies and in people and community and so on. So basically, I think I was fortunate enough to be in a government that was led by a really also entrepreneur mayor, with a team of people that was focused on changing. So it was not about managing what it is, just it was about, okay, this is a difficult time, so let's really do change for the after. And basically, let's do two things. First, manage the best we can this financial crisis with huge impacts on people, but also prepare the city for the after crisis, because there's always an after crisis. And it is really important to understand that we cannot be just trapped in the present, basically. So at that time was about, the word entrepreneur was not used in Lisbon. The word startup was used in Lisbon, right? So what we did basically, and it is my firm belief, is that in these moments that are really more, harsh, it's also the time where you can have more freedom to just do what you think it's right in terms of, because people will accept, I would say, more easily, and you have more ground to basically do kind of out of the box policies.
Yeah.
So that's for one hand. On the second hand was, we really do think this. I wanted social support. I wanted the support of the people and the citizens for some of the things that we want to do in the area of economy and entrepreneurship. So the participatory budget was really important, because, just to give you an example, the first incubator, which is basically, it was where everything started, Startup Lisboa, was a proposal for the participatory budget. It started there, right? So it was proposed to create the first urban incubator in Lisbon, and it was the most voted proposal of that year. I think it was 2010. Yeah. So basically it started to grow as something that was also coming from the ground up, right? And we were engaging people. So basically that is something important. And the second thing that I think is really important is to understand the identity of the city. What was Lisbon? What made Lisbon different from Berlin or from London or from Paris? Because cities, in my perspective, as countries, but basically cities, they have their own identity.
Yes.
And their own strength and their own areas of being different. And you have to know that, you have to understand that, and you have to put that in the core center of everything that you do. It was my strong belief. So basically you said, okay, we are the city with more sunny days per year. We are the city where you can work downtown and go surfing at lunchtime and go back to the office and have a meeting with a VC fund in New York, because it's morning there. So we started to work with what the city is. It's there. I did not invent, of course, the features of the city. It is what it is. And it kind of worked, basically. So we started, step by step, engaging people. We brought the first cohort of startups and entrepreneurs to Startup Lisboa, bringing people, people coming from abroad, from Berlin, from London, from, at that time, also some European, some American entrepreneurs. So we started like this, small, and the idea was to basically, like a virus, start, contaminating the whole surroundings. So from one building, we went to 2 buildings, then we went to 3 buildings, then to a residency. Then we had this huge strategy for the entrepreneurship strategy of the city. So we have a good, also good area in city council working in this entrepreneurship strategy. So the whole city, started to be contaminated and feeling this vibe, let's say. And yeah, in 2015, Lisbon was elected the Entrepreneur City of the Year by the European Commission. And Web Summit came, and the rest, the story, basically. Yeah. So I think it's about knowing what the city is, not wanting to be like Berlin, because we'll never be Berlin, and Berlin will never be Lisbon. So just make the most out of what makes it different, because it's better than just try to be the copycat, basically.
And if there's one thing then that stands out in the midst of the financial crisis and the constraints that came with that, I think the courage to do something very different, both in the way that, the participatory budget played a role, but also to really attempt something to make something that didn't exist before, because you believed that it would be for the betterment of the city and eventually even the effect it had on the country. So that's really interesting, which is a good segue to talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah.
One of the first things that I noticed when I first came across your work was your title at the Futura Foundation. I would also encourage everyone while we're here, you have just started publishing a podcast as well with the
Mhm.
Futura Foundation. So I'm going to give a little plug and shout out here for people to check that out. So your role at the Futura Foundation is Chief Imagination Officer. So
Yeah.
maybe before we dive into the questions I have on that specifically, what your role is, but maybe you can give a summary of what the Futura Foundation is, which I think is really inspiring and necessary and a great initiative. So maybe we'll do a quick summary and then we jump into my questions I have.
Okay. So Futura Foundation is a foundation that is registered in Portugal. So now we are a Portuguese foundation. I always like to tell the story of how it started because I think it's really important to know the story. So basically, I met my co-founder, Ruth Schaber, late, and after that, her husband, Glenn, through a common friend actually living in Berlin, Lisa with her. So basically, in our conversations, me and Ruth, she asked me what was, in my perspective, the most pressing challenge of the city and basically of the country. And I said the housing crisis, which I really do think is one of the most pressing challenges because we are not really taking care of that. I think there's social and economic and political implications huge for our future.
Yes.
But basically, we started talking about that, and she decided to buy this building in Chiado, in Rua da Emenda. So she and Glenn bought the building. And what started as a residency for women working on, I don't know, their projects, because the idea was, okay, so we will not, of course, resolve or solve the housing crisis through one building, of course, but it's a start, and maybe, who knows, some other people will do the same after us, or we buy more buildings, let's see. But what started as a housing solution now is kind of a project to change the world. So we have been growing on ambition and ideas, basically. So basically, the Futura Foundation is a house and a fellowship. So basically, we are just still designing some of the layers of the project, but basically it will be for women under 35, so beginning of their active lives or careers, working on global challenges, climate, democracy, social cohesion, AI. So we are still basically designing and deciding what are the challenges, because the idea is to have a good set of challenges that are the most relevant for Portugal with global impact. So they will be there for up to one year. So it's their house, it's a fellowship. And basically we are building several layers, if you want. So the fellowship is the heart, okay? And then we are building several layers like mentorship, community impact programs like volunteering programs in community, partnerships with different organizations, foundations, universities, governments, local and national. So basically the idea is to be a space where really talented, we usually say rock stars, could be scientists, could be engineers, but can be artists. It's really diverse. The idea is to be really interdisciplinary, basically. So to be there, to have the space to develop, to think, to work on their projects. And we are not an incubator, as I usually say. We are a house where they are taken care of. So basically, it's you said that the idea of taking care of for us is really important. So we want that space to be a safe space for housing and for work, and that when they are taking care. And the idea is that they will have access, for instance, to master classes, to mentors, to content, resources. And there is one thing that is transversal to this, is future thinking. That's why we call it Futura. Because you could be working on climate or democracy or demography or education, but always what we want is that you are looking at the future. So detach yourself from the present and let's try to imagine the future. Let's try to build a path where you can anticipate how the world could look in 25 years. There's tools to do that. And let's basically see that you receive enough, resources, contents, knowledge, experience for you to imagine how to get there. So it's about imagining and building the future. And we call it Futura because for us, the future is feminine. So that's why it is Futura, basically.
Because the actual word in Portuguese, from what I learned, ends in an O, which is male,
Yeah.
right? So you took the liberty to change that, which I appreciate. Raising a 10-year-old daughter,
Yeah.
very much in favor that we do whatever we can to, level the playing field and really support women leaders to build a future that we all want to live in. Is a great transition to your role. And as I teased, your title stuck with me. It's Chief Imagination Officer.
Yeah.
And initially when I read it, I smirked because it was right after I had a conversation with Jackson Kahn, who was also a guest here on the podcast. And he's a former policy advisor to the Canadian government. And he had published a report which was titled The Imagination Gap. And it was talking about, in the context of AI, how, companies struggle not with, access to technology and capital and what have you, but they struggle with imagining how they can create value in a drastically changing world. And in my mind, that imagination gap exposes what I think is a big gap in traditional leadership education, business education. So what, from your perspective, what does the Chief Imagination Officer do?
I think, it was something that for me, what drives me is people and ideas. So I'm an idiotic person. So in terms of having many ideas per minute, sometimes the ideas are really not good, and sometimes you fail, of course, and that's what it is. But I like to think of myself as someone that is always trying to find solution, an idea, imagining how to get out of here, basically. And then this project Futura is, for me, it's kind of I think I say that in podcasts, it's like a blank page. When someone asks me, what is the most value thing for you here? I mean, there's a lot of value things. The fact that I get to work with Ruth and that we have this amazing expat here wanting to invest in philanthropic project, for me, it's like an amazing story. And there's a lot of other amazing people here doing philanthropic work, which is great. And I'm really grateful for that. But it's also about the fact that we have a blank page because we have been doing some research on other organizations, foundations, universities. And there's projects that work on future literacy, on future thinking or imagination, or they have a fellowship or they are residency. But there is not, at least until now that we have noticed, the project that brings together all these layers and basically put it in one project. So basically it's the fact that we have a blank page and we can imagine how that page should be written, basically. So that's how I see myself here in this project. So of course we are a small team. We are 4 people basically now, but it's the idea that I think what I can give to the project, what I think it's the best thing that I can give is myself in terms of putting ideas and imagination to write this story, because I think that's what I can bring to the project. So that's why it's called Chief Imagination, because I'm trying to not to be that CAO but CEO in a way that it's not about that formal, really structured, sometimes gray role. It's about, bringing sparks, bringing ideas, bringing people, connecting different communities. How can we do this? Let's try to design the fellowship, but let's do it in a totally different way that, for instance, universities do it. So basically, let's imagine being different. And that's my role. It's imagining how to be different, basically.
It's fantastic. And one of the questions I had written down for myself is, given that the very exploitative practices of how we've run organizations in general over the last 100 plus years is clearly failing us in many ways. I was wondering if in the future, in order to live in a better future, we need a Chief Imagination Officer in every single organization at the highest level. Or maybe better is, because you mentioned education earlier, we're born with incredible imagination and when you listen to kids talk about how they envision the future, how caring they are, how kind they are, how we might actually need to change education to build and keep the skills alive that are already there to have many Chief Imagination Officers in the future. What's your
Yeah.
thought on that, given that you've spent time
Yeah.
also in educational policy?
Yeah, probably no. When in 2015, before going to government, I publicly defended that the government, which I would then be a part of, should have a Ministry of the Future. It's something that I was not inventing the wheel. At that time already, at least Sweden had something similar. It was
Yeah.
not the same, but it was similar. Nowadays, the Wales government has the future generations coming in future. So nowadays, there are some examples across the world, but it goes to the chief imagination officer or the responsible for imagination, because the point is, when you are in an organization, in this case, let's see, it's governments, but it's the same in a corporation. When you are in an organization, first you have really short cycles. You mentioned that. So you have short cycles of the board or of that mandate or of that term that basically it's 3 years, 4 years, depends, but basically it's a really short term, right? So basically you are always running to do something or to avoid something that happens in the first 2 years. So basically you are always in that mode. There is, okay, I have to do this and do that. And every day you have a new urgency, right? So every day something happens, right? So it is really difficult when you are in office, and I experienced that for many years, to just bring the teams and bring yourself into, okay, today is like this, but you know that there will always be a future. The situation today will change. That is for sure, right?
Yeah.
Basically, you have to imagine that, like in 2 years, it could be different. It doesn't have to be like that, right? I think the best example that I can share is, of course, COVID time.
Yes.
I mean, of course, during that time, every day was a different urgency. Every day was a different problem. Every day was a different question. You were always on urgency mode, right? So who has the time to imagine the after COVID? Do you even have the space in your mind to do it, right? So if you are conscious on this, and if you know about this, and I was always fighting against the idea that we are just working for now. No, we are working for now and for the after.
Yes.
Because if you do not prepare the future, and if you don't imagine how would be the day that this period ends, then you'll have nothing when it ends, right? So it is really important to bring someone, call it chief imagination officer, call it the minister of imagination, the minister of future, whatever, but someone that is not immersed in the day-to-day routine, urgencies, demands, because you have to have that space to build the future. If not, you are just, managing the status quo.
Yeah.
And that is not changing basically nothing, right?
Yeah. And what I'm hearing from listening to you explain this is you need to have the space and the time to imagine the future, and at the same time stay still grounded in people and people's needs and the care for best outcomes for people, which is something that I often see, at least going out the window in the corporate world, in the business world, where you have all this innovation theater and futuristic imagination theater, but it loses very quickly the grounding in the real world and actually the betterment of the future for people.
Yeah, that's true. And I really experienced that during COVID times again, because of course people were suffering.
Yeah.
And of course, it's really difficult to, to just respond to, the next minutes, basically, right? And so you have to, and I learned a lot during that time, I really did, because you have to be grounded. You have to know that the reality is like this. You cannot say we are looking at the future, because people are just suffering in the present. So you cannot take them to the future. They are not capable of that. So you have to understand that, and you have to care for that. But so you have to, let's say in the back office, work for the future, because you always know that whenever is a crisis, that crisis will end.
Yeah.
We might not know when, but it will. And you have to be conscious of that, and have to imagine when it ends, what will people find out in that moment?
Yeah.
And you have to have the answer for that.
So I want to talk about leadership specifically with you. We've talked around leadership, and obviously your I think examples are spot on, and I think a great example of how I think of humanistic leadership.
Mm.
And that's why I started the podcast, to figure out, what does this look like? And hearing you talk through very real examples, that are a proof point is fantastic. With your work now with Futura Foundation, and everything you've done in the past, you've worked with a lot of different types of leaders: business leaders, academic leaders, policy makers, and political leaders. What's broken in our most common understanding in leadership? And from your perspective, if we're inventing a future where also we're investing to level the playing fields for female leaders, what is different? So what's broken currently in our understanding of leadership, and what does a better version look like?
I think that one of the things that is broken is the relation between people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true for corporates, for politics, for whatever. So basically, you talk about the crisis of imagination. I also do think we have a crisis of imagination, which I think it will grow fast. But we also have a crisis of trust,
Mm-hmm.
of seeing the other, of understanding that you do not govern in the void. You do not run a company in the void. So you have people working there with you. You have people that relate with you. You have people that basically, let's say, your shareholders when you are in politics. So I think what is broken, in my perspective, is the understanding of the people. I think that's what's in. I don't only think, there are some researchers and lots of researchers that show you that what is driving, for instance, the more far right movements
Mm-hmm.
and the racism and the violence in some cases is about people feeling that they were left behind, that no one is really looking at them.
Yeah.
And they are kind of in that moment in time where they feel that they have given all the chances to so many people across decades, and they do not feel that their life is better. Basically, they feel it's worth.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really, my perspective, is broken, is the way that leaders connect with people. There's this idea, that's an idea, is, power tends to transform people.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be really conscious of that. And I always had this on my mind. So I'm just a common person that is passing through. I know that, I'm just passing through. So I know that's like 1 year, 2 years, I don't know how long, but I will be out of here. So I'm just
Mm-hmm.
passing through. And that makes me really understand that while I'm here, my role is with those that I work with and that I work for. And that is relation that you establish with people. That's why, for me, it's so important that the idea of participatory projects and the idea of, going out of the office and being with people and
Mm-hmm.
understand and listen to them. And I think that's, for me, that's what is broken, is this relation between leaders and people in general. That's my feeling, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I can absolutely see that being the case. And oftentimes, from also many of the conversations I've had on this podcast and outside, it often starts with the connection that the leader has with themselves,
Mm.
that then carries, and then obviously their connection with the rest of society, and the understanding that, what good is a business for if it doesn't serve the betterment of the
Yeah.
world and many people as possible. Same for governments, obviously, as well.
Yeah.
So I think that was a very powerful summary.
Yeah. Just to add on that, what you are saying, another thing that I think is broken, goes back to what you are saying, is the way that we see the future collectively. I think that's also broken. I think
Mm,
in so many ways, so many corporations and so many political leaders, the way that they tend to, disregards the connection with the planet, with the ocean,
yeah.
biodiversity, with everything that surrounds us. I think many people, especially the young generations, that is really something that is also really important in terms of the connection. And sometimes I don't know, I just look at some political leaders or corporate leaders and I'm like, I mean, what's the sense of that?
Hmm.
I mean, why are we drowning right in this sea of nonsense?
Yeah.
And I mean, so many people will suffer because of that, right? So,
Yeah.
and people see that and they don't really trust, connect, relate. So, yeah, I think we are living like in this mad period of time. So,
We
yeah,
certainly do. But I
yeah,
also I do see in at least my students that I come across and the younger people that there is a much more, obviously I'm generalizing, but more than not have a much more connected understanding to
yeah,
things like sustainability, environmental
yeah,
issues, and even they're very aware of, I hear a lot of my students talk about the loneliness epidemic and the disconnect and
yeah,
how that's perpetuated by all the digital technologies that we put upon them. And I'm certainly taking responsibility on my end, being part of the big tech world for a long time, so that gives me hope. Um, i want to talk, and I need to talk with you, given really where you said that, the intersection of art and culture and public policy. I need to talk with you about AI before we
okay,
close. Specifically, I saw on the Futura Foundation website, you published these letters from the future, which I thought is a really
yeah.
great thing. And I would encourage everyone to, we'll link it in the show notes, to go check it out, because I thought it's a great idea. One of them reads, "Dear Present, it would be wise to come here with well-regulated AI."
Hmm. Yeah.
So, from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest risks, and what are the potentially biggest opportunities if we imagine a better future where this powerful technology can be used for the general good? How do we get there?
That's one question for just two podcast episodes.
Yes. We'll have you
Okay.
back.
Yeah, I think so. For me, in a nutshell, so AI is something it's here. Probably like in 5 years, we will not be talking about AI because it's like a friend told me a good example. Like AI will be like electricity. You just press the button and your room gets light, right? So
Hmm.
I think it will be something that will just enter our day to day in a I don't know. You'll get lost in the idea of always discussing this. I think
Hmm.
that's for sure. I think it has amazing potential in terms of what it can bring for people, for the way that we tackle some complex challenges, the way that nowadays we can, of course, amplify ourselves in so many ways that it was not possible before. But of course, there is also huge risks, like you mentioned. So for me, I mean, there's a lot of risks, but usually I try to focus on the risk of total loss of imagination, the ability to think, to have critical thinking,
Hmm.
just do something without going to whatever you use as platform and asking for something. And this is not the same as it was like, for instance, we stopped using physical maps because then we had the maps on
Yeah.
our phone, because of course that changed the way that our brain operates in so many ways,
Yeah.
namely the spatial sense that we have, for instance. But this year is so much deep and it's so much more, change in a way that you can build the future, because imagination, critical thinking, the capacity of solving problems is so important,
Hmm.
especially in a time where the more machines come into the game and solve things and define things, and if you don't have that capacity to imagine and have critical thinking, I think it's really a nightmare, to be
Yeah.
honest. I really do think, because there are some interesting studies from MIT about this, how your brain, when you use AI and you do not
Hmm.
use AI,
Yes.
how your brain reacts and how it develops. And it's amazing, the difference. And you can see that, right? So that's, for me, is the thing that really makes me more, I'm not say scared, but basically worried. And
Yeah.
I think that's not only about regulation, basically. It's about how you view education. How do you teach kids? How do you make, how do you design the space of the school?
Yeah.
What are the tools that you use for teaching, right? So it's about thinking the school of the 21st century in a time where, technology basically kind of is mainstream. But you have to understand that you also have to keep these future leaders, let's say like this, because that's what you were asking. Also with human capacity and the human seeing of the world and the care, going back again to your words. And that is really a huge challenge. And to be honest, I do not see this happening in the world. Maybe some countries is starting.
Yeah, I was going to say we're seeing very early signs. Mostly, I think, from what I've seen in Europe, there I've more exposure to that, right? From devices being now pulled out. I think Denmark pulled out all iPads and devices out of school. There's certain parts of Ireland. There was just an article in the New York Times on removing phones out of schools. And really going back to, especially in very early childhood education, all the way probably to kind of preteen, at least middle school, where it seems like we need to really focus on anything that connects us with our own humanness, right? From making stuff with our hands and making art. And intentionally, I forgot if this was in Finland or in Denmark or Sweden, but where I read about a school where kids are intentionally, young kids, put in groups where they have to take care of each other. And across genders and sexes, really taking care of each other, so that they learn at an early age what that feels like. Because I think a lot of this, what you said earlier, is imagination needs the human judgment too, right? We can imagine a lot of things, and clearly there's a lot of imagination that goes in a very kind of post-human catastrophic world, I would say. That is not the imagination we're talking about. We're talking about the imagination of things that are in a future where we apply human judgment and make sure that we as a collective thrive.
Yeah, but even, okay, of course we don't want the doom imagination, but even if it is, I think we just want kids and people to be able to imagine, right? And it's not, of course it's important to think about taking iPads or iPhones from schools, but that's just a detail, right? So in the sense that they will get out of school and they will have access to everything, right? So it's just during that space, right? So you also need to, then there are some examples across the world. You gave some, but there are some examples. It's about putting them into nature, understanding the connection. Why do they breathe? Where does come oxygen, right? So it's simple as this, but it's about, making sure that the human nature, what we are as human, is basically in the core of the learning and the process and the growing up.
Yes.
And then you can use AI and they can, of course, be amazing entrepreneurs and persons and so on. That's great. We want that. But we want them to be that with a human, human personality, human approach of the way the world should be, basically, right? So that's it.
Well, then to wrap us up, I have a lot of students listening to this podcast as well. If there's one piece of advice that you would give to our future leaders, the young people we send out into the world, what would that be?
I think for me, it's always about pay attention to people. There's one advice that I can give is, while you are waiting for the bus, don't be looking at the phone, look around. And let yourself be surprised by, the shop that you see, the person that is, reading something, the color of something. Because, again, I think the way that we relate and connect to what is around us is so important in terms of understanding, imagining, having ideas. And sometimes maybe you look at one, shop or grocery store or whatever, and you have like these haha moments and you have an idea, for a new business or for inventing something new. It's just about, look at the world, observe the world, and don't be close only in looking at the screen, because the world is not in that screen.
Wonderful, and a great way to wrap up. Thank you so much for your time. This was incredible. Maybe we do need to do another podcast. We'll see. I certainly will make sure I follow your podcast and all the work you're doing with the Futura Foundation. Thank you so much for the time. This was incredible.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this week's show. Thank you for listening to Poets and Thinkers. If you like this episode, make sure you hit follow and subscribe to get the latest episodes wherever you get your podcasts.